Hello and welcome again to Android Design in Action. My name is Roman Nurek.
Hey guys, Adam Kosh.
Hi, Nick Butcher.
And today we have way too much content, so we're just going to get started. Today's episode is on device automation apps. The app that we'll be looking at today is called Tasker. And then we'll also go into a deep dive on touch feedback. And then we have a good amount of design news to cover as well, so let's just get started. So if we can look at the slides, Jeff. I can't really see if we're looking there, but I guess we are. Okay, so this is on the left side, the Tasker app. Now, Tasker is basically a device automation app. In the App Clinic, they kind of use the term device profile apps. This is kind of, I guess, a subset of that. Basically, it lets you create a system of constraints or contexts and create a set of actions or tasks. I guess tasks are collections of actions in this app that get run when the device enters that kind of profile, that context. So, for example, if the date or if the weekday is Monday through Friday and the time of day is between 9 p.m. and 5 p.m. 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., you can be thought as like in the work profile or in the work set of contexts. And then so once you enter that context, enter that profile, there's a lot of terminology in this app. It's somewhat confusing, but it's very well thought out. When you enter the context, certain things can happen, and when you leave that context or profile, other things can happen. So there's an enter and exit action. So that's at a very high level what the app does. It lets you do a number of different things from setting system settings automatically to speaking out text to doing all sorts of interesting things. And then, of course, the number of different profiles or different constraints that they have is also very large. So you can really, really customize the set of behaviors you want. So this is the app. As you can see here, there's kind of these three tabs: profiles, tasks, and scenes. We're not really going to talk about scenes that much because I honestly didn't really get a feel for what they were. But profiles and tasks are two of the most important things here. So here we have a single profile, which is my work profile, and on the left you see the different contexts that need to be satisfied to be in this profile, and then on the right hand side you see basically the actions that occur when you enter or exit. In this case, there's only an enter action, so when you exit this profile, like when you leave work, basically nothing will happen. There won't be like an unmute or anything.
And then set to unleash a panda as soon as you get to work.
Yeah, I couldn't really find a better icon for muting. Unfortunately, the built-in icons didn't really have a really obvious mute icon, so I just chose a panda because they're cute and cuddly. Oh, well.
Okay.
And basically here, there's some standard stuff. There's these actions in the bottom that let you add things, add a profile in this case, accept and cancel changes, turn Tasker on and off as a whole, and then to edit things on the screen, there's a lot of long pressing going on, which if you look through our guidelines on gestures, you should really reserve long press for other things. But there's a lot of complex interactions and a lot of stuff going on the screen. So that's why we chose to think of a kind of like a reimagining of what it could look like. Before we jump into the redesign, Nick, Adam, any thoughts?
This app's been on my radar for quite some time. I think they won one of the early Android developer challenges, and I think the features you described are super powerful, right? But I've always been put off whenever I get to the Play Store listing, right, and you see those screenshots. It's very intimidating looking. Like all the different, I have no idea what all the different kind of controls refer to, and the plethora of options it seems to offer up. So I was pretty excited that we got to take a look at this application and try and make it, make all that power perhaps a little easier to tap into.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, let's just move on.
Okay, so let's look at the redesign. So this is the reimagining of the Tasker home screen. So on the right-hand side, I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see. On the right-hand side here, we have Tasker, and obviously we've refitted it with. Wow, saying refitted sounds like exhibits. what's that kind of car refitting show that he had?
Pimp My Ride.
Pimp My Ride. It sounds like pimping rides or anything. Whatever. So we've refitted it
like
with
a plasma screen TV. It's going to fold out.
Yeah, we've
from the
thrown a
side or
plasma
something.
screen. Okay, we should really fly through this because we have way too much content. Anyway, so we have, we fitted it with, the standard action bar and tab bar. We've basically taken their core tab bar that they've had in the previous screen here, and we've made it look more hollow, obviously. And we feel that these tabs are probably fine. Separating out the app into these 3 core sections is probably okay. It's really up to the app to decide what their information architecture is, but we left it as is. We've moved the on-off switch for the entire app to the top right as a key action. And in this case, some could argue that you shouldn't have actions in both the top right and in the split action bar. But in this case, it's really kind of like a global. It's not really an action. It's really like a toggle, like a high-level toggle for the entire app. So we felt that it was appropriate there. And then in the content of this screen, you see your profiles. But here you can't really edit the profiles, and this is one of the things that I found that was a little confusing with the current app, is that viewing the list of profiles and editing an individual profile is all in one screen. It'd almost be like seeing a list of contacts and editing each contact all in once, almost like a spreadsheet, and it just felt overbearing. So we decided to split this screen up into 2 screens, where on one screen you see the list of profiles, and you can obviously turn them on and off, which is a simple action that you can take. But then to edit the profile, you touch once to get into the details, and we'll show you that. So here you see the list of contexts. This is called my mute at work profile, and there's the list of contexts or constraints that need to be fulfilled. And then when you enter, it mutes, and when you leave, it unmutes. And then here's an example of a profile that's turned off. For example, send "I'm coming home" as a text message, and we've decided to turn that off, and there's no exit action, there's only a single enter action there. And then you can add a profile using the standard action bar action there. And then there's another feature inside of the menu, deep in there somewhere, which was Search Tasker, which I don't exactly know what it did, but it was just kind of like a global search through the app. We decided to expose that as an action in the bottom left. Before we move on, any comments? Should we fly through? Keep going. Okay, let's keep going.
That's good.
So. And in this same exact screen that you saw in the beginning, right, you see this this kind of both viewing a list of profiles and editing a profile screen. This is the editing portion that we broke up into a separate screen. Where here you see the profile itself, the enter and exit actions that you can select using a spinner, and then there's a little shortcut here to edit each of these tasks. And again, a task is a collection of actions, which we'll see in a bit. And then to add a context or add a constraint, you simply would press this inline add button. And of course, you could put this in the action bar if you want, but this is just an assortment of different types of ways you can expose this. And then to remove something, you just swipe to dismiss it. And then there are probably other actions you can take on each individual context. For example, editing should just be a one-touch thing. But if you want to duplicate it or clone it or something, maybe that could be exposed through an overflow affordance. And obviously, if you want to delete multiple things, you should allow for multiple selection using contextual action bar. Okay. The next screen, this is an example of selecting a task. So when you exit this mute at work profile, here are the list of things you could do. You can say, oh, there's no exit task, or you can browse all tasks and manage tasks, or you can select one of the existing ones that you have there. Pretty straightforward, nothing fancy there. On the next screen, this is basically where you're editing a task, and you can see here there's a lot of there are a lot of objects that you deal with in this app, and so one of the core points overall with this redesign is to simplify things, to make it very obvious what you're working with. And so here you're working with a list of actions for a task, and previously you were working with a list of contexts for a profile. So you want to make it very, very clear throughout every step in the process what the types of data you're working with is and where in the structure it is. So here is another example of how you can kind of use swipe to dismiss and a simple add action here at the top to replace a bunch of buttons that are on screen for like deleting and adding and things like that. And actually here you'll notice that there's no real way to delete something. You have to long press to delete, which is it seems kind of like extra work to have to do that. I think there's probably one or two more. This is the place where you can kind of rename a task. So if you jump into the task details, you should be able to edit everything. One of the ways you could do that is to have like an inline text field with the name. So you just start changing the name right there and then. Or if you don't think that that's going to be a very common thing, you could move it into the action overflow as kind of like a rename additional action. And I think the last screenshot I want to show here is adding an action. This is one of the more important parts. So actually this is adding an action, not a context. So when you add an action, like when it is time to, or when I am at work, for example, mute the phone, or speak some text, or whatever, airplane mode, whatever. To do that in the current app, you have to kind of go into a browse mode where you see this overwhelmingly large set of things you can do, and it's kind of hard to really find the thing you're looking for. And I think in this case you're generally more in search mode rather than browse mode. So I think that it'd be a better case here to basically have an autocomplete. So if I'm in the list of actions to take, I just start typing volume or mute or something, and it gives me a pre-populated auto-completed list of things that I can do, and as soon as I touch, it just adds it. And if there's configuration step, then it just shows the configuration step. So I think that was it. I know that was super fast. We went through that in 12 minutes. Nice. Anything else you guys want to say before we move on from the screen redesigns?
I really like the way it feels a lot cleaner now. I think generally dialogues just aren't the answer. The previous app popped up a lot of dialogues, which kept a lot of context and a lot of load on the user to kind of remember where they are. And I feel like the new setup with the before and after just feels a lot easier to use for me.
Yeah, and this app in general is just really complicated. Like, it does a lot of things, and so I think breaking them into breaking the different functions in different screens really helps the user navigate through these different sections.
Yeah, really in this case it's simplifying. Actually there's a lot of cases in the past where we've combined multiple screens into one, and I think that this app can do well by splitting things up more since it's so complex. Before we jump to the touch feedback session, I just want to briefly talk about some iconography. Well, actually, I guess branding, and actually it's really just branding, this umbrella of branding. This is the current icon on the left, and here's kind of what it could look like, matching the redesigned theme. So the redesigned theme is kind of like a blue and orange color scheme, and so here's what it could look like with that color scheme. And this better fits some of the other app icons that are out there, just purely in terms of styling, not so much in iconography, which is kind of the most important thing to be memorable, is like, what is in the icon, but to make it feel a little more modern and up to par with some of the other apps that are out there. And then the last thing I want to mention is the lack of a feature graphic. You cannot be featured, absolutely cannot be featured. The editorial team for Google Play will do nothing with your app in terms of promotion unless you have a feature graphic. So make sure that you add one. And this is just one example of what a feature graphic could look like for Tasker. It could be as simple as just having your name and the icon there, and maybe like a tagline or something, but make sure that it's also legible and clearly delivers the message at small sizes, because this feature graphic can appear in very small sizes on phones and other devices. So
yeah, just to expand on that just a little bit, like Roman says, this one same large asset, it's like 1024 pixels wide when you supply it, and so people get tempted to cram all kinds of information in there, but really resist that, because it can be shown very small. If you think about a small handset, kind of like 3 inches, like diagonal handset, it's going to be shrunken down greatly. So my advice to people is always to get your feature graphic and resize it down to about 100 pixels wide, and check that everything's kind of legible and still looks good at that kind of size. And the other tip is that if you are lucky enough to get featured, the graphic can be shown in the Play Store, like on the front page, without much context. So I always find it's helpful to have have your feature graphic convey some of the meaning of what the application actually does, because they're going to see it on its own without the benefit of the title and the description text and the screenshots. So really have it kind of stand alone.
Yeah, and it could appear without the icon and appear without the title. So absolutely, that it can appear standalone is a very, very important point for feature graphics.
And resist putting screenshots in there, because they don't size very well. And also, if you include a device frame in it, it just has the ability to look dated very quickly. So kind of try and resist that.
Absolutely. All right, shall we move on to touch feedback?
Yeah.
All right, Adam, you wanna drive?
Yeah, sure. So we wanted to discuss a little bit about touch feedback. We actually look at a lot of different applications in our role, and surprisingly, one of the things we see broken in a lot of them is touch feedback, which is strange because it really does give the user a sense of responsiveness and indicate that something's happening within the application. And the amount of effort required to actually add good touch feedback in your application is actually not that much. So it's definitely something with sort of lower amounts of effort that has great payoff. And of course, the canonical source for information on touch feedback is the design site. So if you just go under style, there's a section called touch feedback. I'll cover this on the next page. There's a bunch of states here and some more information on sort of recommendations of how you should actually style the different states for touch feedback. But we have some tips, I think, on the next screen. Yeah, so the first thing to remember is all interactive elements should provide feedback. Not some of them. Every single one should provide some sort of feedback.
Basically, like if it does something, it should do some. It should look like it does something when you press it.
Exactly. And another point to make is you should be consistent. So we often see people customizing touch feedback for parts of the application, but then they don't go and customize, say, the action bar touch feedback. So you have sort of the hollow blue in the action bar, but you have a completely different color scheme for the rest of your application.
One thing that can help with that is the Android Hollow Colors, website, which basically generates all that for developers, as well as the Action Bar style generator, which again does all that for developers.
Yeah, combined, that'll really help you get sort of 99% through your application, being consistent there. We'll touch on this again in a second, but you should really ensure that the full touchable target area has feedback, so not just a portion of it. If it's touchable elsewhere, it should really have feedback across the entire item. As we mentioned, customize, add feedback for custom components and whatnot. And also, don't forget about the multi-select mode and contextual action bar. Those are really important modes, and you should really make sure that there's touch indicators when you're in the multi-select mode. So we've got some examples, and we can discuss some of these points on the next slide here. Let's see.
It'll load in. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is just some of the system apps to start with. We've got Google Plus on the left, YouTube in the middle, and the system gallery on the right. So one area I see a lot of people leaving out touch feedback is when they're sort of fully customizing a list view. So they've got this long scrolling list of items, and they've really customized it. So in the case of Google Plus, they've got these sort of nice cards. YouTube, it's almost like a card-like interface, but it's sort of rich items showing the YouTube thumbnail. And very frequently we'll see people forget to add the different states to these kinds of list views. So there's two sort of different, different types here that these apps have taken. In the Google Plus app, for example, they've sort of covered the entire item in a sort of blue highlight, hollow blue highlight. I quite like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like an overlay. In development terms, it's basically the draw selector on top attribute on list views and grid views.
Correct. And in the YouTube app, they've gone sort of and shown the overlay. Sorry, it's not an overlay. They've gone and shown it underneath the main thumbnail there. So it's another approach you can take. It's really up to you which one to choose. Personally, I like the Google Plus method a little bit more, but when you've got rich graphics in your list view, it's really comes down to how you want to display it here. And then the third screenshot shows the gallery, and it's got the contextual action bar activated, and you can see again it's got the touch feedback there, so that when you select each of these, it shows a nice sort of blue hollow overlay.
And actually, you get a lot of this for free using on Android 4.0. Well, on ICS and above, you get this for free with I think the selectable item background attribute. So if you use that throughout, you don't even have to custom create all these assets, these blue assets. It just comes with the system, with the framework. So it's really, really useful to just use that, to just drop it in, Android background equals this, or Android foreground equals the selectable item background thing, and you get a lot of it for free.
Correct.
It's also included in the support library, right?
Is it? Oh, that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, I guess it's worth knowing as well, like a standard list view, if you use the standard list items, it will have touch feedback for you, but it's only when you really customize these things that it may not, because you're building the layouts from scratch.
Yeah, so I think the key thing is if you're customizing, providing your own button drawables and stuff like that, make sure you include all the custom states as well, right?
Yeah, and it's a selector drawable or a stateless drawable. So you should have XML along with your PNGs that indicate which PNG file, which 9-patch or whatever should be used with each state.
And while you're in there creating your kind of press states, remember to also include the focus states as well, because devices with trackballs and Google TVs and so on will really, really benefit from those states. So while you're at it, do the right thing.
Yes, correct. And as I mentioned on the design side, it has some examples of how you should, how you should color and style those particular different states.
Or just use Android highlight colors.
Yep. So here's an example of a third-party app, the TED application, which we like to use as an example here on the show. There's 3 different screens here. Now, it's kind of hard to see in the first screen, but there's a gray highlight actually on the top left part of the action bar, as well as on the tabs. I kind of double tapped here just so we could fit it into one screenshot. Obviously, you
contorted your hand in there.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to take a screenshot at the same time. But they've got a sort of light gray highlight here when the user touches down. And then if you look at these other screenshots next to it, you'll see for other items, including the action items in the action bar. Yeah.
Can we just move it into view?
Yeah, sure. Let's zoom in a bit here. They've got a red highlight. So they've got 2 different highlights, and they kind of use them for different items across the application. So places, I guess, where they're already using the the sort of trademark TED red color, they'll use the gray highlight, and other places they'll use the red highlight. So for example, in this button here, which says listen to this talk, they've got the red highlight again. And this comes back to that point we were talking about, where you should really highlight the entire touchable area. So you'll see here that the whole red highlight is covering the entire line, because you can touch anywhere across that entire line.
Yeah, so the first time you touch it, you'll probably touch around the icon or the text, but then when you see that the rest of that row responds in red, you'll immediately, your brain will internalize the fact that this whole thing is a single object that you can interact with. So it really helps make that association.
Yep, and I think we should move on because we're on time.
Yep.
And then finally, two other types of touch feedback worth mentioning. There's boundaries and communication. So if you look here at the left screenshot, it's kind of hard to see. If you get the slides after the show, you'll be able to see a bit easier. But this is showing the edge resistance when you swipe down, and there's nothing more above the current list. So you've got the sort of blue glow showing here at the top left in Google Play.
I like to think of it like a force field you just run up in against because it starts glowing.
It's dissipating energy as its kinetic energy is turning into light, basically. And this is, for developers out there, this is the Edge Effect and Edge Effect Compat classes that let you do this on custom views.
And of course, using standard views, you get all of this for free. It is worth remembering how it looks and how it behaves, because you don't want to have, say, blue colors at the top there that might be clashing with it.
I think it's quite interesting that if you use an app when you can see they've implemented their own kind of horizontal paging rather than using something like a view pager component, and it doesn't give you that feedback when you've reached the edge. It just kind of feels off, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
yeah,
definitely.
For sure.
And then in the second screenshot, it's the gallery application, and when you swipe to the edge here, it kind of has a 3D effect where all of the different thumbnails kind of tilt to the side, again showing resistance. So this is more of a custom implementation, I guess. So you can definitely implement something custom. It's really up to you. Personally, I like the blue glow, as we've been talking about, but depending on the feel of your application, the gallery is very much of a 3D sort of feel of an application. So that's why it's sort of appropriate here. And Launcher has something kind of similar as well, but the whole thing tilts. And then finally, just wanted to quickly mention this, and this is fairly advanced. I can't imagine that many app developers doing this. But there's this concept of communication, so for touch gestures. So in this example, Gmail, you've got the sort of swipe to delete or swipe to archive. As you swipe, you'll notice the actual item starts to fade out slowly as you move across more. And if you slide back again without actually completing the swipe, it'll fade back in again. So this is just sort of hinting to the user that this item's going to go away as you swipe it off the screen. So again, this is pretty custom and probably more advanced, but definitely something to think about if you have these advanced gestures. All right, we better keep moving. We've got 5 minutes left.
All right, so let's fly through Android design news. We have like 6 or 7 items. But let's start with the redesigns of the Outlook.com app by Taylor Ling and Sam Nolte from Holo there. Really awesome work. Sam even basically did like a multi-pane UI. He did a whole bunch of different screens, and Taylor also kind of had his own take on this app. And you notice that actually there are some similarities. There's some very obvious ways to to map an older app to kind of the newer Holo style, and this is just one example of minor variations of that. And I think that they're both really good jobs there. Let's fly through to Juhani in response to their redesigns. He also did a post on the Outlook.com app, and basically he gave some anecdotal feedback, or actually some real feedback, I guess, with some real data on how when you release an app that is using older kind of gingerbread, even eclair donut styling for newer devices, meaning now if you release that type of app now, users are going to respond very negatively towards that. So be careful while doing that if you're thinking about doing that.
Just don't do that.
Just don't.
It's the easier way, yeah.
And then one of the folks that submitted an entry for the stencil giveaway a few weeks ago, Gang Gao, he did a UI or a couple of UI mockups for the Dribbble app, or for what Dribbble could look like on Android. This is pretty cool. Nick, you want to add anything about this?
Just that I want this.
Yeah, I saw your comment.
Really
just
nice.
Want ! Right? Yeah, I feel the same way.
Says it all, right?
Okay. Next up, we have we just released yesterday the new version of the Maps API for Android. This is V2 of the API. It requires Google Play services, and that's all you need really. There's no separate bundle or anything. It's really just part of Google Play services. And this is basically if you want to get vector tiles and 3D building facades and all this cool new 3D map stuff in your app, you should definitely switch over to this from the original map view. And this also works with fragments and support library fragments as well. So you get a lot of the benefits. Basically, everybody's been asking for this, and finally we're able to.
It's a big
release
launch.
it.
Yeah, and
For designers, I guess the key takeaway is you can now have maps kind of throughout the application. If your developers have complained and said, oh, that's really hard to do, that's no longer the case, as well as having some pretty advanced features as well, right? Like so having custom overlays and different shapes and boundary boxes and so on and so forth. This really, really allows lots of really, really cool interactions with maps.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the different angles and panning and tilting that you can do. I think that's going to work really nicely with some of the apps that are out there.
And remember, you can design custom marker icons. So the marker icons don't have to look like the teardrop shape or a little circle shape. It could really represent. It could be. It could use your branding if you want. It could be a custom shape or whatnot. So lots of options there. And there's this new website, AndroidViews.net, which basically has a collection of different custom views and different UI widgets and things. And this is kind of similar to the Ultimate Android library, which is more broadly scoped. It covers libraries that are for image caching and all sorts of stuff. But this is very specific to UI widgets, and it's a very nice presentation of the different UI elements you can use in your app.
It's very pretty, but I'm not sure about that icon. It's like a steaming Android.
Yeah, it's like it's exactly what it looks like, a steaming Android. He's very angry.
Okay. Next.
And Nick, do you want to talk about Marie's post?
Yeah, so basically Marie is a regular viewer and active designer in the community, is trying to get the community of Android designers to kind of coalesce and speak to each other a bit more. I mean, I certainly resonate with this kind of idea. I think when we were doing the design competition, there was a ton of activity going on Google Plus, especially with people posting on the #AndroidDesign hashtag, and that was really cool. I'd really like to see that continue. So Marie is trying to get everyone together. So if you follow this QR code, and you comment on her thread. She's trying to put together a circle of designers working with Android. So comment on the post and we'll try and share that around so everyone can kind of connect to each other and start talking about Android design.
All right, so we're at 11 o'clock. Let's fly through the last couple of things. I recently did a blog post on designing for tablets. So if you're designing for tablets, which means hopefully everybody that's watching, check out this blog post. It'll link you to things that you may not have seen before. Definitely kind of a good resource for designing for tablets and even developing for tablets. And lastly, we recently put out a developer survey. So if you're an Android developer and you haven't filled out the survey, and you are thinking, I really wish that the Google team or the Google Android team could do this, this, or this, fill out the survey and let us know. Thank you. And I think that's it for stuff for this week. As always, I am Roman Eric.
Adam Kosh.
Bye. Thanks, Nick Butcher.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
See you later.
Yeah, see you next time. Peace out.